Good day, viewers, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. First of all, I'd like to say that I hope that everyone has had a good Guy Fawkes day and a good bonfire night, and hopefully I would have wanted to post a review or an episode around that time, but my friends and I had a bit of a dinner and a bit of a party and all, and well, aside from going up late until the dead of midnight, we had to do a lot of cleaning up. Or rather, I had to do all the cleaning up. But yeah, better sooner than later. But for now though, I think it's a good time to celebrate a particular album that, by the time of this recording, has turned 50 years old, just like last week's episode. But I'll get into that in a moment. But firstly, I want to talk about Led Zeppelin. Several months ago, I reviewed one of their more later albums, Presence. One that, well, it has some good tunes, but wasn't really a big name compared to Physical Graffiti or Houses of the Holy. But of course, today I'm talking about an album that was released 5 years beforehand. And this has quite a bit of history behind it. Back around 1970 to 71, Led Zepp were in kind of a bit of a mixed blessing of an era. Even though they had like 3 decent albums, the last one, Led Zeppelin 3, had received some rather lukewarm reactions to it. Not that it was anything bad or anything, just that a lot of critics seem to think that Led Zeppelin didn't have much of a consistent direction, or they just kind of doing the same thing over and over. So, for the next album, Led Zeppelin reacted by doing what no other band or singer or musician ever did at the time. Create an album that, well, had no title whatsoever. No text, no credits, no nothing. And the higher-ups of the record company feared that this would be professional suicide, especially since it's been like a whole year since they last toured and over a year since the last album. But of course, in spite of, or rather because of all that, the album became a big success and a big hit, becoming one of, if not their most highest selling album from Led Zeppelin. Though part of that reason could be because of a particular song for it, but I'll get into that soon enough. And while this album it officially has no title, many people would come to know it as simply Led Zeppelin 4. And while not only have I said this album technically has no title, it also has no text either. Not at the front, not at the back, not on the actual spine of the record, not even inside of the gatefold. It's all good. It's just all good, pretty artwork that all speaks for itself. Now, sure, I reviewed a lot of albums that have no text in them at all, and there are a whole lot more that I'll no doubt look into sometime down the road. But at the time, this was unheard of. This was only like 2 years after something like Abbey Road, for instance. But still, at the time, this was something that was still very risky, something that was rarely spoken or even thought of. And honestly, the artwork is very simple, yet very, very kind of deep, good meaning to it. On the front is basically an old portrait of a particular young fellow with a lot of sticks on his back, which kind of fits the whole traditional rural pastoral feel to it, that is contrasted and juxtaposed by the sort of urban, almost demolished feeling of the surrounding area. And honestly, according to one of the members, this was apparently to kind of symbolize how we kind of have to take care of the earth and how far we've gone from that kind of tradition. And honestly, if you had never heard of Led Zeppelin before, you wouldn't know what kind of music you'd be getting into just picking this up on the go. Or even if you had heard of Led Zeppelin, you would probably expect this to be from that particular band, just picking up and seeing this rather textless album. But with that out of the way, is the music itself still managing to hold up after 50 years? Well, let's not judge the book by its cover and actually look into the music of Led Zeppelin 4 and find out for ourselves. Beginning this album is the bluesy rocker Black Dog. Named after a nameless black Labrador retriever that would occasionally wander around the studio where most of the album was recorded, you know, someone should really take care of that dog, if that thing even had an owner at the time. But if so, then we wouldn't have such an awesome song like this. But anyways, the song itself actually isn't about a black dog per se, or at least literally. Instead, it's rather about a woman who makes them sweat, makes them groove, makes them burn and sting, and whom the lead vocalist, Robert Plant, tries to go in on, but he soon gets rejected by her. She spends his money, she takes his car, and preaches how she'll be a star. And while Robert himself kind of gets reminded how big-legged women like her, they've got no soul and all that. So basically, it's about a Casanova essentially. Well, you know, she could be a black dog in a metaphorical sense, since black dogs are kind of a common thing in British mythology, often representing death, or at least destruction in some way or another. So this woman could be a very a common deceptive figure, as a kind of caution of how to trust other people, even someone as seductive or sultry or or at least a bit attractive. You never know who exactly that kind of person is beneath the deep skin. And as for the music itself, it has this very clever use of call and response between Robert's a cappella vocals and the very bluesy music of the rest of the band, and it's the equally awesome rocky music itself. It has a bit of there's a bit of a Muddy Waters vibe to the guitars of Jimmy Page and the bass of John Paul Jones. And all in all, off the bat, this is one whopper of a starter to an album like this, with the recognizable rocker of music of the Zepp, and a kind of a good start to the album itself, but also kind of showing how, while Led Zeppelin may be known for their bluesy music, it doesn't actually represent the entire album as a whole. It's more of a slightly more diverse range, which I kind of like from albums like this. But still, it's a good showcase of Led Zeppelin as a kind of old school bluesy rock band that, despite being English, they still kind of capture that vibe of the old black American blues musicians of the early 20th century. It's still a great start to this album regardless. Next is Rock and Roll, a simple yet very fitting description of a name for this kind of track, and kick-started by the very chattery drums of the late great John Bonham. The song follows the classic 12-bar blues, or at least a variation of such, similar to something out of Chuck Berry or Little Richard. The lyrics in question are very simple and very straightforward, mainly recurring on about how Robert misses the old days. It's been a long time, and it's been a lonely time since he last rock and rolled. Obviously, seemingly referring to this feeling of nostalgia of the old days of classic old rock and roll back in the 50s, which is likely what the members of Led Zeppelin would have grown up with. And apparently, according to a source or two, this song was written in response to certain critics who said that the previous Led Zeppelin album wasn't rock and roll enough, So the band themselves decided, hey, you want a rock and roll song? We'll make one for you. And so they just kind of threw the song out there, and here we are. Regardless, though, it's still a very simple, short, and very catchy song. It captures the old vibes of those old 50 songs while still trying to modernize it a bit with a more hard-on edge with like heavy guitars and whatnot. It's If you're a fan of those old 50 style rock and roll songs and music, this is definitely a good one to start with. And if you're a big fan of Led Zeppelin, I'd say give this one a try, but chances are you've probably heard it already. Best case in my example was it was used as the opening to the Life of Rock series with Brian Pern. Though I heard some people have kind of associated with a particular Cadillac advert they utilize this song. I haven't watched the actual advert myself, or I might find it online, but whatever the case, it's good that a great song like this does get some exposure in one way or another, even if it's used in a particular commercial or an advert. Then we have the Battle of Evermore. Radically different from most other Led Zeppelin songs up to this point before this. This kind of demonstrates how this band can really stretch their musically creative muscles and tackle different styles and genres and whatnot. Here, the hard and heavy electric guitars set aside for the mandolins and acoustic guitars, and plus the collaborative vocals of Robert Plant, as well as guest singer Sandy Denny, and only those guitars and vocals. No drums, no bass, none of that. Just a simple, folky, almost Celtic-esque kind of song, with lyrics that clearly play homage to a lot of the classic Middle-earth stories by J.R.R. Tolkien, especially referencing characters like Galadriel, the Queen of Light, Sauron, the Dark Lord, and the Black Riders, the Ringwraiths. So basically, Led Zeppelin were the original Tolkien nerds. Jokes aside, though, this is honestly a very unique song from Zepp's discography alone. It's radical from anything Hemel. It is a changing point for the band from my perspective on how they kind of did their kind of music. They could do more than just heavy rock and roll, bluesy kind of stuff. They could also do more relaxing, soothing, kind of almost medieval kind of music, as demonstrated here, and the next song. And honestly, it'd be a delight for any fantasy geek like myself to check out and listen to. Not just from the little wink nods to the Tolkien characters and worlds and stories, but also the very vibe of the music itself, which kind of fits that theme with its pastoral medieval vibe. If you like that style, this song's for you. And so we come to the end of side 1, and probably the most well-known song of the album, if not all of Led Zeppelin's discography, is considered one of, if not the best and greatest rock song of all time ever. It is the 8-minute epic rocker, Stairway to Heaven. And like I said, is considered one of the greatest songs, if not the greatest songs of all time out there. And honestly, it's hard not to see, or rather hear, why. I could do a whole other video just on this song alone, but I'm gonna get through it, and here we are. Anyways, what is there to say about this? It to describe the song itself, it continues the pastoral sounds of the Battle of Evermore, but it kind of takes it much further. Lyrically, it tells of a materialistic woman who thinks that everything can turn to gold. She tries to buy a stairway to heaven, but in the end, she learns that there's far more to life. She learns to be a rock and not to roll. And the music kind of carries along with that, starting with a simple mandolin, the acoustic guitars, with a bit of a pipe woodwind and such. Then going alongside the occasional vocals of the wonderful Robert Plant. More and more instruments come into play, such as more layers guitars, the drums, and then eventually reaches what all many also consider to be the best guitar solo of all time. And again, it's hard not to hear why. It is emotional and just iconic, that guitar solo alone from Jimmy Page. And it just evolves into this epic hard rock finale where Robert kind of goes on to show how this woman has become enlightened, our shadows taller than our souls. And eventually it all comes to this climax, and after all the music has been passed off, it's all faded out of sight, Robert sings one last time, she's buying a stairway to heaven, so calmly and silent and almost quietly. And that's honestly how the song goes out. It is a beautiful ballad. I can't think of simple words I can use to describe it. It is that magnificent. Though might joke about it, but it's hard to do even that. It's just excellent. Now, one thing I will say is that many people would know about the obvious accusations of satanic messages in this song, or at least one section of its lyrics. Though, I will question this with one simple question. For the sake of argument, if the song did have genuine evil, satanic, devilish, backward messages or whatever, how come it's only one section of the song and not all the lyrics that are technically reversed into these evil, satanic propaganda messages or whatever? I don't think most other people ever brought that up. It's just weird. In fact, that's a pattern I've kind of noticed when you hear these people accuse these random pop or rock songs of having these kind of evil messages. It's always a certain phrase or a verse or a bit of the chorus. It's never the whole lyrics that they accuse of. It's just one bit and that's it. If it was meant to be an actual deal, why wouldn't they have be the entirety of it? Why wouldn't all of Led Zeppelin songs have those? Why is it just one song and just one bit of it? It's just odd. But anyways, that aside, Stairway to Heaven is a fantastic song, and it is no wonder why so many people loved it, and tried to play it to the point of music shops apparently banning it from being played and kind of auditioned by those who try to play on their guitars. It's just is that popular, and it deserved that popularity. It is that epic.